Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Mark, there's lots of small business owners here tonight. Your story of starting with pretty humble beginnings in Punch Bowl, building a great big company, and then getting an Order of Australia is aspirational for all of us. As entrepreneurs, we know that we have to dig in, we have to have a go and try. Can you tell us about when you decided to risk it all, sell your house and start Wizard?
Well, the period was 1998, and my situation was I was married. I had 4 kids, little kids, all under the age of, 13 or something like that, 4 sons. And I was, at the time, I was running a property development business and construction business along with my business partner. And we were doing a subdivision in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. And back in that period, there was a bank called the Rural Bank of New South Wales. It doesn't exist anymore, but the Rural Bank used to lend to people in regional areas, and this is a regional area. At that stage, it was very regional. And we bought a site off the New South Wales government, which was earmarked to have a school, and they decided not to have a school there. So we decided to do a development there, and we paid our deposit. We had to settle it. And of course, being developers, we had no money. And so we went to the Rural Bank to get the funding, but the Rural Bank said, we've changed the name to the State Bank of New South Wales. We just don't bank regional areas now. We've moved into the city. They moved to Oxford Street, set up head office, and they said, we just can't see ourselves doing the deal. And we got a bit panicky because we had to settle. And I got introduced to a mortgage broker. I never met a mortgage broker in my life. And I got introduced to a mortgage broker, and this mortgage broker guy organised the funding for us. We settled. He organised the money for us to do the subdivision. It wasn't that big. It was only 30 blocks. And I thought I was pretty impressed. And at the same time, I saw what Aussie Home Loans were doing. So, and John, who ran Aussie, was a good friend of mine. We both knew each other quite well. Particularly, he was a law clerk as well at the same time I was back a long time ago. And I said to these guys, I reckon these brokers, there were 4 of them, I said, I reckon you could go and do what he's doing. Bear in mind they were brokers, so they used to lend other people's money, banks' money, but John was lending sort of his money. There was a program called securitisation. He was sort of tapping into the capital markets in partnership with Macquarie Bank. And I said, I reckon we can do that ourselves. I have a master's degree in this area, and I said, I reckon we can do it, and because I've been following, and they said, you really think so? And I said, yeah, let me buy 40% of your business, and I'll take us to there, and I'll find someone who can do what Macquarie's done for Aussie. We'll change the name from whatever it was called, Mortgage Acceptance Corporation or something like that, to Wizard Home Loans. That in itself is a story of its own, how I came up with the name. But I said, we'll have this name, I'll own 40%, and you guys run it. That was a good idea in theory. So the funding came from selling my house. So I sold my house. That's how much I believed in it. And it was a rising tide those days of money. Money was becoming really liquidity in the world was heavy. There was a lot of liquidity in the world, not dissimilar to what we had during COVID. Now, the money came to the world during COVID for a different reason, because governments had to throw money at the world to keep the world afloat, or what they thought they needed to do to keep it afloat. But at that point, there was a different reason, but nonetheless, it was similar. There was a lot of dough around. Interest rates were falling really quickly. Houses, therefore, became much more affordable, and hadn't adjusted relative to the lower interest rates either. So there was upside for people to buy. So I just thought it was a great time to buy it. So I backed myself, basically, and I went hard for it.
Yeah. Well, you did, obviously, because of the success that it had. So you pointed on that about why Wizard. Can you tell us a little bit about the name?
The name, well, I was lucky enough, just prior to that, to be sitting on a plane when Virgin was sort of kicking off in Australia. And I was sitting there was only business and economy. I was sitting in the very front seat, and Branson sat next to me. And I thought, my God, this is an opportunity. And so I just went at him, And this is a long time ago, by the way. This is 27 years ago or something. And I thought, well, I'm just going to ask him. I got him for an hour. I was flying from Brisbane to Sydney. He's got nowhere to go. And so he sat next to the window and I was on the aisle seat. There was just two of us. And he did I don't want to talk to you, look. Like, he kept looking out the window, but that didn't stop me. And I sometimes worry about telling people the story because people see me now and they remind me of what I did and they go for me, you know. Like, he was very polite, extremely nice, and I asked him lots and lots of questions. But the question I asked him first, the most important question I asked him, I said to him, how'd you come up with the name Virgin? Like, it's a pretty heavy name to put up there. And he said, well, Mark, one of the most important things is that it doesn't matter if people like your name or not, as long as they remember it. That's the most important thing. Your service is the thing that decides whether they like it or not. Mm. So the service speaks for itself, because in those days it was records, from his point of view, in airlines. And I thought to myself, well, I've got to come up with a name that everyone's going to remember, doesn't matter whether they like it or not. He then said to me, the letters in the word virgin are strong letters, V-I-R-G-I-N. So it's a strong sounding word, forgetting what it means and the connotations, but a strong sounding word. And he said, that's really important. And he said, and when you build your brand off that, you've got to have two things: notoriety with affection. In other words, people got to know who you are, so you've got to work out how to tell people who you are, build an awareness program, but they've got to like you. So I thought, well, I went through the dictionary, and I come with the name Wizard. I thought it sounded strong. Wizard, it's a strong sounding word. And it didn't matter if people liked it or didn't like it. It's a memorable word. It has Australian connotations in terms of sport and financial services. And sometimes and I thought, well, I can build notoriety around this name, and I can build affection as well. So, yeah, that's sort of summarised way. That's sort of how I came up. That's how I came up with the name Wizard. Why I came up. That's more importantly why I came up with the name Wizard. It was off the back of meeting. That particular person is probably one of the best marketers we've ever had in history. So I just had to make sure our service matched, and our service is not about how we go about it. Like, at the end of the day, people need money to buy a house, and that in itself solves a lot of problems from being liked. You know, if I give someone the money, people don't actually look at you as though they're borrowing the money. They look at, like, they don't think, I've got to repay this money back. People don't think about that. They think, oh, I've got to make a payment every month. I can afford it because it's affordable. The amount of money that's been approved is affordable per month. The thing they look at is the house, whatever it is they bought. And so that was easy to be likeable from that point of view.
Mm. I mean, you talked about notoriety, and I know back in the 90s and early 2000s, you personally appeared in the TV commercials.
Yeah.
And so most Australians could recognise you. Was part of notoriety about actually injecting some personal brand into your company strategy?
I was always, and still am, a customer of St George Bank when it was a building society back in those days. Some of you may remember that. And St George Bank used to have an ad on television, which never left my mind, where they had a friendly dragon. It was a person in a dragon suit that sort of waddled around. It was cute and friendly and memorable and sort of a bit lovable. And they also had an actress in that ad called Julie Anthony. Anyone here remember Julie Anthony? And everyone loved her. She was just, and that was the difference between St George Building Society and every other lender in the country. And I never ever forgot that ad. And then John, of course, did his ads where we'll save you. And John was brilliant at it. So when we went to the advertising agency to craft an ad for us, and I'll never forget, they said, do you want to go on the ad? And I thought, I've never been there, I don't know what to do, I've no idea. And they said, because you have to put some personality, as you just said, into the ad. And also, interestingly enough, they use words like authenticity, which is sort of the stuff we do these days when it comes to digital marketing. they talked about authenticity and just be your authentic self. And I remember on the very first day we did shot the first ad, and we didn't have much money, and we didn't run the ad for very much, but relatively speaking, it was big for us. And they didn't tell me what to wear. And I remember they gave me the ad, was all written down. I had to rehearse the words because I had to say 25 words. What I was for 2 or 3 days. I was looking in the mirror saying these words to myself. And then I got up in the morning ready to go to do the ad, and I thought, shit, what am I supposed to wear? And I rang the guy up, Simon, his name was Simon, rang him up, and he said, whatever you reckon, what do you think? So I turned up a pair of jeans, pair of boots. I had a white T-shirt, like a crew neck T-shirt, and a brown, tanny coloured jumper because it was middle of winter, a V-neck jumper. And I did the ad like that. He said, that's perfect. And I said, why? He said, because that's what you decided to wear. And normally, bankers wore collar and tie and all that sort of stuff. So that allowed me to stand out. Nothing other than just me being myself. And naively, I didn't do it on purpose. They just left it to me, but they were very clever advertising guys, and they just sort of let it unfold and see what Mark would naturally do. They didn't actually tell me what to wear. They didn't prescribe how I should dress. So I just dressed the way I thought I should dress, and it worked.
Yeah. Well, your naivety, I mean, sometimes that's a strength, right?
Yeah.
Because you haven't got any preconceived ideas about what you need to do. And so I guess for a lot of us, we're navigating uncertain times. We've got technology changes, interest rate rises, changes in strategic relationships overseas. Can you think about a time where it's been a bit hairy for you, a bit of a scary one, and how you navigated that time?
Yeah, I think it was the year 2000, year 2000, July 2000. So at this stage, Packer had invested. Kerry Packer was a half owner of my business at this stage, so he became partner in 1999, and he was a 50% partner, and they had injected funding into the business, capital, and in 2000. And when I did the deal with Kerry, I had to give him, obviously a whole lot of financial models that sort of made assumptions about growth and various other things, growth in the marketplace, growth in the mortgage market, etc., as you would expect. And in the year 2000, they introduced Goods and Services Tax, GST. They introduced it on the 1st of July 2000. And on the 1st of July 2000 to the end of September, the first quarter, well, July, August, September, the end of the first quarter, for the first time in Australia's recorded history, the mortgage market was negative. In other words, it didn't grow. Every other quarter prior to that, it had grown since recorded history. And recorded history was like sometime during the 50s. And, of course, my modelling showed it would grow. And then for this quarter, it didn't grow. But at the same time, I was spending on the basis, my expense budget was spending on an assumption of growth. And of course, I met Kerry every month, once a month. and it wasn't good. This guy's got a brain, like quantitatively, like in terms of numbers, he never forgets a number. And it didn't matter that we were just one of his many investments. He remembered the numbers, and he remembered growth, and he remembered the percentage growth, and he looked at the difference between the June quarter and the September quarter, and he saw that there was negative growth. And then he looked at the expenses, and the expenses were growing as we budgeted to do. And then we were eating into the capital at a faster rate than he expected, than we ever discussed it on any basis. And he took me to task, big time. And I never forget how confronting it was to have someone like Kerry Packer. He's not just my partner, but someone like Kerry Packer, basically pulling your pants down and give you a good hiding in a verbal way. And that was I lost my confidence because that's what I do in those days anyway. I was good at financial modelling and that sort of stuff, and I sort of fancied myself as good at this, being skilled at that stuff, because I'm not a mortgage guy. I mean, I didn't sell mortgages. I've never sold a mortgage in my life. I've never approved a mortgage or even filled a mortgage form out for others. I filled them out for myself, but not for anyone else. That was left to the rest of the business. My job was to make sure all shareholder matters were done properly, and this was a shareholder matter. It was a warranty in the agreement that we entered into. I warranted that my modelling was correct, which basically gave him an out. So he wasn't thinking of that, but I was. I was thinking of all the worst possible outcomes. What could happen? He could ask for his money back, blah, blah, blah. He could sue me, take control of the business. Like every worst scenario you can imagine was going through my head, and it was always happening about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Always.
Yeah, so, and we'd only been going for a year because, he invested in 1999. I only started in 1998. So we've been going for 2 years, but he and I had only been going for a year. So it was a really bad outcome. And he said, you should have known about this. He said, because they've been talking about GST for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And it was John Howard who brought it into play. He said, you close to the Howard camp, which I was at the time. And so I had no one else to blame but myself. So I then had to embark on a cost reduction program, which I'd never done before. I'd never gone and fired people. Well, it's a pretty harsh word, but I mean, tell people that it's over. And I had to cut back a lot of costs to catch up, because it went backwards, but it went backwards for at least 6 months before people got their head around how the GST worked. And so builders started going broke. All sorts of things started happening in the year 2000. We had an election coming up in 2001. Interest rates were quite high as well, so we had an interest rate run. In the 2001 period, interest rates started coming down. That was an election year. But that period, the interest rates were going up. So everything was against me. For me, it was a perfect storm. And so it was a cost-cutting environment that I'd never experienced before in my past, and I had to sort of grit my teeth. And my business is about people. We didn't really have digital systems in those days. These days it's a lot different, but those days it was all about people, spreadsheets and people, calculations and approval processes, etc. And so that was a pretty. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. Misstep by myself in building up a model that I presented to somebody whose money I took off the back of that.
Yeah. But do you think that sometimes you learn more about yourself in the tough times than you do when you're winning?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because Kerry actually asked me that question before he invested. So he said to me, on the day that everything was finished, and on the day that I had to go and sort of meet up with Kerry Packer and get the final blessing, so to speak, about the deal that James and the rest of the business had done, he asked me 3 questions. But the second question that he asked me was, have you ever failed in business? And the reason why, and I said no, I hadn't, which I hadn't. And he then told me the reason he asked me that question, though, was to find out how I respond to when I get confronted with failure. And I never really thought about that, because I'd never failed before. But I'd always been in safe businesses, relatively speaking, and I always had partners who had bigger percentages than me, who were more experienced than me and older than me. So to some extent I got carried. In the law firm I was carried by older partners, in the accounting firm I was carried by older partners. When I was in the property business, the construction business, I had a partner there who was 20 odd years older than me, and he'd been in it for 30, 40 years. So I was always getting carried by these people. So I was sort of comfortable, and to some extent I sort of relied on them. Now I'm in my own business for myself. And Kerry wanted to know, he didn't want to know so much have I failed, he wanted to know how I responded to failure. And I said to him, I remember saying to him in 1999, I said to him, yeah, but it should be okay. He said, but you presented these models, these business models that show me that the business will be worth X in 5 years' time. So if I invest now, if he invested now, he'll make so much in 5 years' time in terms of value increase, value accretion. He said, what happens if that model's wrong? And I didn't really have a response to that. And I said, well, I've done my research. I said, I've got all the stats from the ABS and all those other places. I said, it shouldn't be. Because modelling is all about the assumptions at the end of the day. And 1 year later, I was wrong. And he couldn't wait to tell me. He said, and he wanted to know, and for him, he wasn't going to walk away. He just wanted to know, back in 1998 how I would respond to that situation. And hopefully, he must have been happy enough because he didn't walk away because I responded in a certain way. He was just trying to see whether I could, and we use the word pivot today, but sort of pivot, like do something about the problem or about the wrong assumption. He wasn't that worried, the fact that I made a wrong assumption, by the way. He was more interested or curious to see how I would respond and if I responded appropriately, which I did. And fortunately, I did. And for me, it was about cutting costs and just waiting for it to come back, but waiting for the flow to come back. And I was pretty confident because people still had to live in houses. And people still want to invest in property. And the GST was never going to stop that as long as population continued to grow, which it was. So I knew it was going to come back. The question is, how long have I got to wait for it to come back? And how long have I got to hold these costs down? And how do I go about getting the costs down? It's not dissimilar at the moment. If anybody's experiencing any downturn in relation to what's currently going on with interest rates, demand will come back. As population grows in this country, it doesn't matter what service you're in, demand will come back. Unless you're in a service that's no longer a service or a service is being outdated by digitalisation or something like that. But if you're in a service that people use but are just putting into the discretionary basket at the moment, that's something I'll put off for a while because I can't afford it, it will come back as liquidity comes back into the system. And if you've got population growth, then there is always more pressure on demand over time. So you've got to work out, how do I survive whilst we're in the downturn? And if you understand economic history, in this country at least, downturns only last between 9 and 15 months, economic downturns. Economic downturns being what might happen as a result of the interest rates being put up. So, and I would say we haven't experienced the start of the 9 months yet. We might have started experiencing in June, the beginning of June, the last rate rise. There's been a bit of response going on around the marketplace that I'm finding and I'm hearing about, and I'm certainly seeing in my business. So the question then becomes, how do I hold the line for at least 9 months, maybe 15 months, maybe a little bit more? Depends on how long the Reserve Bank keeps interest rates up, and we don't know that. So we just got to say, how do we survive this period? How do we save costs when the revenue's not the same? And that's what I had to do with Karen. I learned how to do it then. And I did it at the beginning of COVID in the Yellow Brick Road. I've done it in many of other businesses that I've had. That one lesson was a very important lesson.
That's great. So at that time, you talked about spending, but you spent up big and you became a sponsor of the New South Wales State of Origin team, which you were for a decade, one of the longest sponsors.
Yep.
So how important are building partnerships when you're building a business and a brand?
Well, that was a pretty critical one, and I sort of lucked it a bit because the Super League War started in 96 or 7, I think it was, and by the Tui's, who was the New South Wales sponsor, pulled out off the jersey for New South Wales, and New South Wales was left without a sponsor, and it's pretty important because the New South Wales Rugby League gets a revenue from the sponsors. So I knew someone in the New South Wales Rugby League who was in that part of the department, and I was asking him, what are you going to do? Surely not going to go to the it was literally like the Origin match is going to be on Wednesday night, like tomorrow night. It was about a week before. They didn't have a sponsor. And so I thought I might be able to do a bit of, last minute shopping sale price. So I said, well, you're getting $1 million a year, Tours are paying $1 million a year. I said to him, would you consider doing it for 250 grand? Year one, I want a 5-year contract with options. Year two, I'll go to 350. Year three, I'll go to 450, and so on.
And he said, I don't think so. I don't think we'd do that. It's just too much of a discount. And I said, yeah, but you don't have a sponsor. What do you got to lose? And he said, I'll go and talk to the chairman, a guy called Colin Love, who was a solicitor that I knew. And I thought, he's going to talk to chairman. I would just go and see Colin myself. And I got a bank cheque. In those days, you'd get a bank cheque, and made that for 250 grand. And I went in 2 days before the game, Monday, and I put the cheque on his desk. I said, mate, you're the chairman of the New South Wales Rugby League. Surely you're not going to turn that cheque down. And I attached to it a term sheet at the back, 1 page. And I said, mate, because you've got to raise money. You've got wages to pay and stuff like that. And I just knew that if anyone presented to me, I'd take the cheque, take the 250. Because you know, what are you going to do? You might be worse next year. Who knew how long the Super League war was going to go on for? Nobody knew that. So, you know, it's a bit like COVID period. You didn't know how long COVID was going to go on for. You could do things during that period, and everyone thought COVID was going to go on forever. I think people thought the Super League war would go on forever. No one knew that Kerry and Rupert would do a deal, but they did. And that's, I mean, that was part of the proceeds of the sale of my house that I still had. That 250 was a lot of money to me then, and put the 250. Again, I was backing myself because I just knew that if I put Wizard on the front of the jersey, not Wizard Homeless, just Wizard, people are going to say, who's Wizard? And I remember Tommy Hilfiger launched in Australia with a campaign said, who's Tommy? And it was on all the buses, and I was saying, who's Tommy? I didn't know who Tommy Hilfiger was, like, never heard of it. And I thought that was effective. So I thought if I could just get Wizard on the front of the jersey, people might say, who's Wizard? Like when you watch a football game, like who are these people? Who is it? And that gives me an opportunity then to do some free marketing by answering the question in newspapers or, you know, Footy Show or something like that, and say, well, I'm the sponsor. So it was a pretty big leap, to be honest with you, but you know, I did it. It paid off, yeah. And even today, people still remember the jerseys with the Wizard on it because we did it for 10 years. I guess that helps. And it was some of the most fun I've ever had in my life too, because you know I love the footy and you know, State of Origin being the pinnacle and the #1 rating show in Australia at the time. So yeah, that was pretty cool. I love that.
Yeah, that's great. So not too long after that, you actually sold Wizard to GE for reportedly $500 million, which is a huge measure of financial success. But what were the other markers of success for you? What were you really proud that you'd accomplished when you sold that business?
Well, you'd only been in business for 4.5 years, so what was really important to me is I got my money back and I was able to buy a house for my wife and kids. That was pretty important. Mind you, I got divorced about 6 months later, though. That part wasn't good. That cost me a bit. But what was important to me? Well, I got to learn a lot of things about myself. That's pretty important. And we shouldn't understate how important it is to know stuff about yourself and how you grow into things and you realise where your weaknesses are. In particular, someone like me, realising my weaknesses are really important to me, and where I can build on. But some other things that were really important to me was watching how other people grew. So we had this lady who worked for us. Her name was Jill Emberson, and I needed to get a PR person because you got stuff on the jersey. We're doing ads on television with Kerry, etc. You know, you need a PR person, and I didn't know anything about public relations or publicity as such at all. And you needed a PR person to sort of sometimes jump in, put the shoulder behind stuff to protect you if something's going wrong. And I got recommended, a friend of mine recommended this girl called Jill Emberson, and she was the PR person for Greenpeace. And I thought, oh my God, like, how's Greenpeace person going to know how to deal with financial services? Like, anyway, I did an interview and I really liked her. She was so nice. She was an ex-ABC radio announcer, Jill, rest in peace. She unfortunately died a little while ago. There was a big TV show on about her. She died from cancer, so only maybe 4 years ago. And a wonderful girl. And when Jill came in, I said, "Look, Jill, I'm going to give you the job. because I don't know anyone else. No one else has come for the job. So I'm going to give you the job. And she said, yeah, but I'm at Greenpeace, and she said, I don't really know much about this business. And I said, I'll teach you. I'll teach you about what you need to know, but you're going to be a PR person. I don't know about that part. And one of the great things about the exercise of Wizard was Jill became the best PR person on financial services in the country. And to watch someone like her go from Greenpeace to financial services, which are sort of nearly diametrically opposed in some respects, and for her to be so good at it and loved it so much, and to be so well respected by everybody, by all the journalists in particular, which is a hard thing to do. You know, to cross over from Channel 9 to the ABC in those days was not an easy task. They were completely different cultures, much more similar today, but then no. And to be able to deal with Kerry and all his team, that was such a fantastic thing for me to observe and to be part of, and for Jill to become well known as a publicity person for financial services. So I guess the answer to answer your question, it was probably watching a whole lot of people become really good at their jobs, and in some cases the best in the country in our particular subject matter. And my branches, my Wizard branches, they started, the earlier ones started bringing their kids in to work in the businesses with them, you know, like, and now those Wizard branches still exist today, but they are now called Aussie, because Aussie, after I sold to GEG, then sold to Aussie and CBA together, and they just changed the name from Wizard to Aussie. So those Wizard branches are now Aussie branches. They still exist today. I know all the dudes and the girls and their families, and a lot of them, they're all retired and their kids are now running them, and they all did very well out of it. And so me and John and the other John from Rams, we sort of created an industry, and now there's 17,000 brokers in Australia, and they deliver 72% of every loan in this country is done through a broker that we created, or we nurtured. And they did the work, but we nurtured it and we come up with the idea, and that's pretty cool to me. That's I don't like using the word, but that's proper disruption. And the banks, because the banks have to close branches down because you can't operate. Your operating costs are too high in a branch relative to the revenue, especially today. People don't bank money. People don't use branches very often. And maybe they've gone a bit too far, but in terms of branch closings, but they didn't need the levels of branches they did have. And so together, you know, banks become more efficient in a cost sense, didn't need as many branches. The biggest decision-making process that a bank feeds into is the mortgage. They don't have to do any of that. That all gets done by my branches at Yellow Brick Road, or Aussie branches, or Rams branches, or Mortgage Choice. Gets done by all those guys and girls. It's done more efficiently than the banks. People feel more comfortable dealing with a person in a branch than going to see a bank. You know, they don't mind telling them, you know, the whole story, etc. And it costs nothing. You don't have to pay the broker. The deal gets done and you don't pay anybody. Broker does all the hard work for you. So that's probably the most rewarding thing to me as a look back of being in business and taking those leaps of faith, not just me, my whole family, and not just my wife and kids, but my mother and father, everybody. My brother worked in the business. My sister's brother worked in the business. You know, all my kids have worked in the business at some stage. I've still got one son working in the business. So everybody in my family got involved at one stage or other.
Mm. Well, I'm sure they really appreciate that. I mean, that's a huge thing.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Importantly, I have a brother, one brother and one sister, but my brother is a lawyer. He worked in the same law firm as me, but he's continued on as a lawyer. My brother, the way I describe it is I cut, he sews. I've never done a deal in my life since my late 20s when I was in the law firm, and he started in his early 20s, in my life that my brother hasn't stitched up for me. So, and his office, I left there tonight, his office is next to me where I'm now, in Yellow Brick Road. He still does all my deals. Kerry, in the end, would not do a deal unless my brother was in charge of it. He wouldn't even use his own lawyers. He said, make sure your brother does the deal. So, I couldn't have done what I do without the support of my brother, my mum, everybody, the whole family. So, they say, as I said, success is always built on the broad shoulders of others. And I 100% endorse that. Even if it's just people supporting you, telling you it's going to be okay. And not everything's great. Like, you get crappy times. You need somebody to be able to go home and have a wish to, go and talk to your mum or whoever it is. Or my brother. And I was really lucky that I had someone in my family like that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of people, I mean, you're the chairman of Yellow Brick Road, and you regularly provide commentary on interest rates and people in higher positions. You provide leadership to your Yellow Brick Road team. You provide leadership in the industry and to mum and dad investors. What does it take to be a great leader?
Well, I'm lucky because everyone else exited that position. So John retired, and the other John never really stood out in front of the Rams brand, and the Mortgage Choice guys didn't really have anybody to do it. So I'm sort of lucky that the media come to me because I'm the only person still around. Basically, they don't have much choice. So, which is okay. The second, but I think in terms of leadership, you've got to be prepared to tell the truth. And I, rightly or wrongly, always say it as it is. And sometimes it gets me into trouble. And sometimes I swear, and I know I shouldn't swear, but I get a bit excited, and I probably get a little bit over exuberant too. And more recently, I mean this year in particular, I've been really directing a lot of my commentary towards a Reserve Bank governor, and that hasn't gone down all that well. But that's about being truthful. Excuse me. I don't say he's this, that, or the other. I don't refer to him as anything, but I do say I think he's made error. And the guy's not, God Almighty. He's just a person like all the rest of us. He's an economist and he has a lot of economic resources, but they make mistakes. And economic history shows that they've made lots of mistakes. I remember in the 90s, the Reserve Bank governor put us in a recession because inflation was really high. Took interest rates to 18%. And that was a mistake because they broke the system and they put us in a recession for a long time. And governments fell as a result of it. Keating's government fell as a result of it. And I'm seeing them repeat exactly the same thing. So I figure as a leader, and I'm sort of, I feel as though I'm sort of leader by default, that I should say what I think and become a voice for people who are doing it tough. I do it for business owners because no one represents business owners. I mean, you guys do a good job of it, but at the end of the day, business owners need to be represented every day, every week. Who represents business owners in Parliament? I mean, the minister doesn't really, because the minister's there to direct you as to what they're going to do for you, but they're not there representing you. Who's talking to the minister? Who's talking to the Prime Minister? And, business, small business, especially ministers, usually are a small portfolio. It sits under Treasury, but it should be, for me, it should be up there with defence. Defending this country is about making sure small business owners are viable.
Yeah.
That's the very first defence of the country. The very first defence. If we're on our hands and knees and we're stuffed and we can't produce, we can't manufacture, we have to import everything, we can't provide all the things that Australians need ourselves, then we're vulnerable. And so this should be elevated right up. We don't have... And I think that the same comes when it comes to not interest rates as much, but the manipulation of our behaviour. The Reserve Bank's job is not about interest rates. The Reserve Bank's job is not about inflation. Because inflation is just a word. It's the sum of a number of numbers in a formula. And it arrives at, via the Australian Bureau of Statistics, at a number. the job of the Reserve Bank is to change your behaviour. The way they change your behaviour is by slugging you with interest rates in periods like we are now, inflation, or where they need growth, like during COVID, is to take interest rates down to the very lowest to influence you to spend money. So a very famous economist called Milton Friedman, American economist, sort of him and Keynes were always sort of arguing about what you should do during various periods of economic upturns and downturns in the US, around the world for that matter. Once said that, and I favour both, because you need the Keynes theory during downtime, the Friedman period during uptimes, theory I should say, during uptimes. But I really like what Friedman said. Milton Friedman said in the 90s, consumers never cause or create inflation. Governments do. Consumers will spend whatever they can spend, and governments are encouraging them to spend it. So we're not to blame for inflation. By the way, we don't even work out how they calculate inflation. They're the ones that decide what goes into the basket of goods and services. They're the ones that decide which items are weighted which way. They give us money, reduce interest rates, we've got more money in our pocket, we're going to spend it. And they know that. And then when it comes to, oh wow, hang on, you spent too much. You're too exuberant, you're spending too much, way too much. Okay, we're going to slug you now. And it's a broad-based thing, so it slugs people who probably are not the ones who are spending. It's probably, people who own properties, generally speaking, unless they've got 30 or 40 properties, but if they've got a house and a family and they've got a small business, they're generally quite pretty astute with their money. But it affects everybody, whether or not you spend in that basket of goods and services or not. And I'll guarantee you, of that basket of goods and services, if I went around the room, there's 90-odd categories, not 81 categories, I mean. I'll guarantee that some of you would be lucky if you spend in 10% of those categories. So, my point being, no one is out there sticking up for you guys. And at an intellectual level, it really pisses me off. And I'm not having a crack at the government, because I probably would have done the same thing as the prior government did, throwing money at the system to try and make sure we don't fall in a hole as a result of COVID. I'm not, but I just wish somebody would get up and say, you know what, we might have stuffed it up, we might have got it wrong, but we're going to do this for a while, and it's going to hurt a bit, but just stick with us, because maybe 9-10 months will be okay. And by the way, can we just try and stop spending as much? And just chill, just calm down a bit. Otherwise, we'll have to keep putting rates up. But just have a conversation with us. And you asked me the question about leadership. I feel as though it's my job, and this sounds ridiculous, to say this stuff. When, I don't know, but why wouldn't Albo, he's a good bloke, Albo. Why wouldn't Albo and Jim Chalmers is a very accomplished treasurer, sit down with the Reserve Bank governor, the three of them, and write a script, and at 7 p.m. on the Sunday night after the news on ABC, address the nation like they would if there was a war, and say, guys, this is what we're doing here. This is how long it's probably going to last. We might get it wrong. We'll review it next month or the month after. And we've got to get ourselves out of this inflation situation because of the following reasons, why inflation's a bad thing. But this is where I think we're going to land. Be prepared to we'll make some mistakes, but just hang in there with us. That's what I'm trying to, they're not going to do it, but that's why I get up and say what I say. And I mean, it's not really paying forward my knowledge. It's just, I'm trying to say to Australians what I think, and I'm not doing a good job of it because not enough people have heard it, but I'm trying to say to Australians what I think the government should do just to make us feel a bit more included. You know, we keep talking about inclusiveness. Well, God, include us. Because we're the ones that have been affected.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'd like to see.
Great. So we might change tact a little bit. Just a reminder, you can use slido.com and use the code 206 and you can ask Mark a question. We'll have a few more questions and then we'll go to your questions. So, as I said, just to change tact a bit, there are some people here that probably don't know you as Wizard. They know you as the host of the TV show The Apprentice, which I believe you were recruited into because of your charisma and your curiosity, I've been told. Why did you say yes to that?
I have a friend who established a business in Australia which became Fremantle Media, which is a big production company in Australia and globally around the world. They have the global rights, Fremantle Media around the world have the rights to produce The Apprentice and The Celebrity Apprentice. Bear in mind, Donald Trump owns part of that. So it was his idea, and he owns a percentage of that show. And at that stage, it was in America and 25 other countries, but wasn't in Australia in 2009. My friend said to me, he said, mate, you're not doing anything at the moment. Wizard had been sold. GE sold Wizard as well, Dozzy, etc. I just kicked off Yellow Brick Road as a fun thing and, right in the middle of the GFC. And he said, would you like to do the show? And I had no idea what the show was about. I'd never watched Donald Trump in the show. I knew what Kerry thought of Donald because they used to play golf and bet in the golf course. And I wasn't sort of in a hurry to become Donald Trump. And he said, look, here's a DVD, watch this, see what you think. And I watched about half of it, and I could see what was going on. And he said, what do you think? I said, oh, yeah, maybe. He said, well, maybe if we could get a pilot up, or not a pilot, what do you call it, a screen test, or what do we call it, something like that. He said, I'm going to come in your office, bring in 6 actors, you'll sit across the table from them, you'll be Donald Trump, etc. Each one of the actors will have a character, 3 boys, 3 girls, and he said, we'll bring some cameras in, we'll just see how it goes. I said, okay, fine, we'll do it, let's do it, check it out. And I was mucking around with it, like I was just sort of role-playing, so to speak. And then, am I allowed to swear here? Okay. No?
What do you think? Yeah?
Okay. So, I feel like I'm in a church because there's an altar right in front of me. And so I got these 3 guys sitting here and 3 girls, and each were role-playing, and one was trying to be abrasive, another one, because they obviously watched the same DVD I've been given. And one guy down the end was very, very quiet. And he was a youngish guy, maybe in his 30s, and he had a moustache, like, say, 4 or 5 days growth, and underneath he had, like, 1 day's growth. So it looked like dark, like a Mexican, and he kept staring at me. And I forgot the camera was on. I was getting annoyed with this dude because he wasn't participating, but he was playing a different role. This is the role he's playing, and I forgot it was a whole role thing, And I said, what are you looking at? And he said, I'm looking at you, because he had to call me Mr. Bouris. He said, I'm looking at you, Mr. Bouris. And I said, but what for? And he said, something about, he said, you look, I'm looking at your features or something weird like that. I said, well, you look like a fucking Mexican. and they recorded it. Anyway, they took it to the TV station who was going to buy the show. And the only thing the TV station loved was that sentence. So they bought the show, and off the back of that, they decided to do the show in Australia, and they invited me to do it, and I did that in June. And I got a call, and they said we're going to start filming in the 9th of July, and 2009. So I'd never done television before, but I did myself a deal. So I think the most important part of this is have a crack at something you feel uncomfortable with. That's the first thing. Second thing is have some fun. Have some fun. Don't take yourself too seriously about it, with it all. But then when you get to a point that it's working or there's something going in your favour, in other words, in this case, they decided to do the show, try and make it work for you. Leverage on leverage on leverage. So the way I leveraged it is I said, okay, I'll do the show. You don't have to pay me. But what would you normally pay someone who hosted a show that was successful? And they gave me some metrics. I said, okay, I want to buy from you, the TV station, who's doing the show, I want to buy you that amount of money, with that amount of money, let's say it's $1 million, it wasn't, but let's say it's $1 million just for the conversation. I want to buy $1 million worth of advertising from you instead of you paying me. In other words, you give me $1 million of free advertising, but the rate at which you give me the advertising is most favoured nation rate. In other words, I want you to give me the same price that you would charge, say, Woolworths, who spend $10 million a year with you. So Woolworths' advertising rate's probably 40% less than the rate card. So I tried to leverage on leverage. And then I also asked them, I want one episode that I can choose the challenge. And it can be anything I like. And of course I chose a challenge related to Yellow Brick Road about, mortgages, or in those days, wealth creation. And I thought about it because I got, start off, they said they could do the Celebrity Apprentice or the Normal Apprentice. I thought, imagine if I got 10 celebrities everyone in Australia loves or hates or whatever, who start talking about, so I'm going to choose episode 3 because I still got 7 or 8 celebrities. I got rid of the 3 ordinary ones. I've got 7 or 8 good ones, and I'll get them to launch something for Yellow Brick Road. And the nature of the show is someone's going to get fired, so nobody wants to get fired, so they're all going to suck up to me. And they're all going to know it's my show, my episode. And they're going to tell me how wonderful Yellow Brick Road is. And I've all of a sudden got 8 people endorsing Yellow Brick Road who are celebrities. I didn't realise we didn't have any celebrities in Australia, but it doesn't matter. No, but I had Julia Morris in that episode, and she is a real deal. She's wonderful, and I knew she was going to win it from the moment I met her. And she won obviously, and she's gone on to do great things. But yeah, that's sort of, so I think the lesson in that is back yourself, have fun with it. Don't be deterred by anything, even if it sounds like something outside of your normal area of expertise, because it was nothing like that for me. And then if you see just an opening, just try and leverage it, and don't worry about ask. My God, ask. Keep asking. They can only say no. Especially if you put yourself in the box seat. And sort of, that's a little bit what I did with the State of Origin sponsorship, sort of, but this time I made it really work for me, and I think it did. And it's not, I didn't love doing The Apprentice, but anyway, I didn't like being in the public so much, but it worked for my business. I didn't have to spend $1 on marketing it. They marketed for me.
Brilliant. So we're going to go to the audience's question, just one more. But I've heard you say if you're standing still, you're going backwards. We're seeing AI start to take over some jobs. We're seeing real technology changes. Where do you think the opportunities are for businesses right now?
If I was starting a business today, it would definitely be, I'm always looking for where is liquidity. In other words, where's there a rising tide of money that can get attracted to a business? Because businesses always need capital at some stage. And I always hunt for capital. I'm always looking for partners to bring money with them and value. So anything that I would do would always have to have an AI component. So you need to have, or I don't want to say, I don't like the word, the phrase.
Run out of money.
Because artificial intelligence sort of has all sorts of weird connotations, scary connotations. It's easy for them to get onto. I'd rather talk about deep learning protocols, things that learn deeply about lots of data that you can feed into it. And I think that if you have a business that can somehow associate itself with deep learning protocols and being able to access deep learning protocols, either to market yourself or to do something with those protocols, like learn about the people who are your audience, or have more learnings than other people who are maybe your competitor. Like, for example, if the banks are the banks, they have a lot of information on your transactions, but the banks don't know the first thing about you before you become a customer. And nor does realestate.com or Domain. They know about you when you're thinking about buying a property, but they don't know anything about you. You might be people. No one knows what people think about. How much can I borrow in order to buy the property before I go onto Domain and realestate.com to become something that domainrealestate.com now know about, become part of their database. Banks don't know that. Banks only know you once you leave the broker site and actually become a customer. So what artificial intelligence or deep learning protocols and what data sets can you get your hands on that allow you to incorporate that into your business? So to answer your question, I only know my businesses, but whatever the businesses are that people are going to get involved in, make sure that there's a component of deep learning models and or protocols that you can incorporate into your business to allow you to know more about your customer than anyone else. That allows you to attract investors, but also, even if you don't need investors, you can fund it yourself. It allows you to build something valuable, more valuable than just the income or the assets you acquire. Because part of your asset base won't be just hard assets. That will be about not just data, but something that actually can tell you about the data. So understand the data, build something out of the data that other competitors in that particular space don't have. So whatever you decide that is your skill base, that is something that really interests you, that you think you can make something of, make sure, I shouldn't say make sure, but try and see where deep learning models can improve the value of a brand new asset for you that others currently don't have. Brilliant.
Okay, we've got some questions from the audience. Thank you for everybody who has actually been sending them through. We've got heaps. Just some quick answers, some really good ones. So,
does that mean I've been talking too long? No. Just joking.
No. How do you change your mindset from a one-man band to building a business?
I'm easy. I'm a good delegator. I mean, I like delegating. I know that I'm weak on lots of things, and I'm only interested in getting people around me who are good at other things. So, and I don't try to be all things in a business. I just don't.
Okay. How can small businesses overcome COVID and now recession with large companies lowering prices and margins? That's from Ian.
You can't overcome it, but what you've got to do is outlast it. So, as I said earlier, you've got to belt and braces, whatever it takes to survive this process. If that means, even if it means locking down your business, not doing any business for a while, but getting ready to resurrect it in the right time and getting some other source of income just to survive personally through that period, do it. But you can't resolve what's going on at the moment. Pricing is, like in my industry, lending money, we're a money lender, the banks are offering money to what they call prime customers, cheaper than nearly the cost of money, plus they're paying them $5,000 up front to change from one lender to another lender. It's just irrational, totally irrational. It's been going on for a year and a half now. It's going to come to an end this month, as I understand, and most of the banks are going to stop doing it this month. CommBank's already announced, a few others are doing the same thing. But I had to outlast that for the last 18 months because I can't pay $5,000 to you up front because banks got balance sheets to go back 100 years. I don't have that. So I have been going through that same margin crunch myself because if I give you $5,000, that's a margin crunch. That's $5,000 out of my margin. I probably only make $5,000 in the first 18 months out of a mortgage of $750,000 mortgage, which means I've got to do, we do billions every month, 2 to 3 billion every month. And if I'm giving $5,000 away to every borrower, I'm just eating into my margin. So I haven't. So I've had to batten down the hatches, manage my costs, and just wait them out. Because irrationality doesn't last long. Irrational pricing, that's market share chasing by, in particular, one of the banks in the Big Four, will not go forever. Sooner or later, someone's going to get onto it and start saying, this is ridiculous. We're buying business, which is what was happening in my game. And they've now stopped. It will stop. But you've got to put yourself in a position to weather the storm.
Couple more. What book are you reading at the moment from our...
From who? Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called... I don't read novels, and I sort of don't read self-help books, so to speak, but I read books about science. So I'm reading a book on chemistry at the moment. I'm also reading a book on mathematics about the way in India, arithmetic is taught differently the way it's taught here. And they have a different way of learning arithmetic and multiplication, blah, blah, blah. And I've been reading about that. I've probably got at any one time 4 books that I've been reading, but most of my books are around science. So I read American Scientific, those sorts of magazines as well. I read The Economist every week. I read the Harvard Business Review when that comes out. I'm talking about the physical version of it. I'm reading, probably some of you have already read it, but I'm reading Peter Attia's book, Dr. Peter Attia. Anyone reading Dr. Peter Attia's book about living longer and better? Health span, lifespan? No? Okay. Well, no, I thought it was pretty popular because I did a talk on it last week, but everyone in the room sort of had read about it. Maybe it's a different audience, but
Exactly.
obviously a different audience.
We're busy.
Yeah, so I like to read 4 or 5 books at a time. I read a couple of chapters and I go to the next book. Maybe I've got ADHD or something, but I can't read a book and just finish it off straight up. I have to just change and read different books. Always science and maths books. I've always got science and maths books on my side a bit.
That's good. Katie wants to know, what else did you ask Richard Branson?
I asked him a whole lot of things about it. One of the important questions I asked him, I said, how'd you stay married? And I think that's an important question because, I always had this imagination of the guy that, he's always standing there with air hostesses and all that sort of stuff, how'd your partner put up with it, your wife? Like, how did she, not put up with it, but what's her story? How does she feel about that sort of thing? Because, I sort of had that sort of same thing in my life during that period. And he just said his wife's wonderful. She's an understanding person and his kids are understanding. I guess that's a standard answer. That's all I got from him. He didn't really want to expand on that, but because you always saw Richard Branson standing there with this awesome-looking virgin staff. You don't see it anymore because he'd probably get cancelled these days. But he did, and that was more of a curiosity thing, a lifestyle sort of curiosity thing. I always wondered how these people survived. I always wanted to ask Donald Trump the same thing. I'm serious, I did. But I had lots of times to talk to Donald. I spoke to him on quite a few occasions because he owned the show and he's always interested in how the show was going. But that he sort of never gave me enough time to ask that. You always got this sense that something was off limits. His hair was off limits. I wasn't allowed to ask about his hair. No, they used to tell me that. The publicity people come and say, don't ask about the hair. Don't shake his hand. Doesn't like shaking hands. And don't call him Donald. Call him Mr. Trump. And of course, I always call him Donald and I put my hand straight out. I'm serious, I did. And especially when there was a camera going. Because he couldn't do anything. He'd have to shake your hand and smile at you and everything like that. Yeah. But that's the Aussie way, isn't it? Really, yeah.
Totally. All right. And we've got one last question from Freddie Fittler wanting to know the score tomorrow night.
Freddie. I don't know, but I'm not feeling all that confident. Look, I really wish the best for the team, but more importantly, I wish the best for Freddie because he must be feeling under serious pressure. And the guy is a really good guy. He's actually a wonderful human being. And maybe that's the reason we're getting beaten. Because Queenslanders aren't. No, just joking. There's always a Queenslander in the crowd. And there's usually always a South Sydney supporter in the crowd. Who's it? I knew it. There's always a Rabbitohs supporter in the crowd.
Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being so generous with your information. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Bouris.
Thank you.
Well, what a great evening for that conversation from Therese and also from Mark. And it's interesting around, my notes here says, can you maybe share an insight that I might have got from Mark this evening? But if I actually look back, I have pages of notes. Be likeable, watching other people grow in his conversation with Jill, taking a leap of faith. Family is important, especially in small business. How do we respond to failure? I like that whole letter U in the alphabet because if you actually look at it, success and failure both have U in it. And it's how we respond to those, which is what Mark mentioned. Leadership, be prepared to tell the truth. Inclusiveness, if you want to have success and defence of the country, consider small businesses around that. Importantly, have a crack and have some fun along the way. Find the leverage where you can and keep asking questions. In new business, look at the deep learning modules that you can own for your space. Be a good delegator. And when it comes to challenges and like recessions, you can't overcome it. We just have to learn how to outlast it. And finally, I know he's reading 4 or 5 books, but there is one more that he might want to read, which is called Swap, How to Market Without Money, from Therese Tarlinton. But let's give a big round of applause and thank you to both Mark and Therese. And once again, thanks to the New South Wales Government and Business Connect for making this event possible. But importantly, thanks to our team at Realise Business because they're the ones that made this possible. They put the effort in. I was saying to Mark before, I'm not sure if we filled the room because of our marketing effort or whether it was because of him, because we sold out in 2 hours. And we had to get a bigger venue and we sold out again. So thanks. I'd like to put our hands together for the team that made this possible. And just finally, if you want to take your business to the next level, look, that's what Realise Business is here to do. We've got a number of advisors here that can help you either through one-on-one advice or the workshops and webinars and events like tonight to help you grow your business. We have taken some pics. If you're going to share things on socials, just please tag Realise Business. Once again, thank you all for attending this evening. We're going to go back out and have some drinks until about 8:30 and share each other's company. If you've met someone new tonight, look, please catch up, say hello, and have a cup of coffee. Travel safe. Until we see you next time, take care.